The night my stepbrother put his hands on me, my body still remembered how to bleed. I didn't scream not because it didn't hurt, but because some part of me had already learned that pain didn't always come with sound. The doctor had said that after the miscarriage, after the emergency room lights and the cold metal stirrups and the way silence filled my womb like dust in an abandoned room, trauma teaches you to go quiet. It teaches you to listen instead. Wesley smelled like old cologne and anger. The kind of anger that thinks it's entitled to take up space. His fingers wrapped around my wrist, tight enough that I could feel my pulse panic under his grip. We were standing in my father's study, David Vance's study, where the shelves still bowed under the weight of his books, and the leather chair still carried the faint scent of his aftershave. Cedar and something citrus. Home. Sign it, Cassie, Wesley said, his voice low, measured, like he was asking for sugar at a diner instead of demanding my inheritance. You don't need this fight. You've had enough loss. Loss. The word landed heavy. My other hand instinctively moved to my stomach. Flat, now. Empty. I tasted iron at the back of my throat and realized I'd bitten my tongue. I'm not signing anything, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Calm, even. Like I was talking to a stranger instead of the boy who'd once helped me catch fireflies in the backyard when we were 12. His grip tightened. Your father wouldn't want you dragging this out. That's when something inside me shifted, not broke, but hardened. My father had always told me the truth, lived in details people hoped you'd overlook. A pause, a glance, a word used too easily. My father, I said slowly, would never send you. For a moment, Wesley looked almost startled. Then his face closed up, neat and cold, and he shoved me back hard enough that I stumbled into the desk. Pain shot through my hip, sharp and white. He released me like I'd burned him. This ends one way or another, he said, already stepping toward the door. Decide which way hurts less. When he was gone, the house felt cavernous. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked louder than it ever had, each second pressing down on me like a reminder that time was still moving even though my world had stalled somewhere between a heartbeat and a loss. I slid down to the floor, my back against my father's desk, and cried the kind of tears that don't make noise, the kind that soak into carpet and memory. Before all of this, before the miscarriage, before the lawyer's letters and Wesley's clenched jaw, my life had been quieter. Ordinary in the best way. I worked part-time at the foundation my father started, reviewing grant applications, calling small nonprofits to ask what they needed most. I liked listening. I liked hearing how people stitched meaning together out of very little. My father, David Vance, built Vance Solutions from the ground up. He liked to say the company wasn't about money, but about trust, about doing work so clean it didn't leave fingerprints. He raised me on Sunday breakfasts and Wednesday night phone calls even after I moved out. He never forgot my birthday, never forgot to ask how I was really doing. Vivian entered our lives when I was 24. She was polished in a way that made you check your posture without realizing it. Always perfectly dressed, always smiling just a beat too late. She brought Wesley with her, already grown, already sharp around the edges. They moved into my father's house like they'd always belonged there, and for a while, I believed it. I wanted to believe it. When my father died suddenly, heart attack, they said I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. One minute we were arguing about whether I needed new tires. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway staring at a vending machine that hummed too cheerfully for the moment. Vivian cried beautifully at the funeral. Wesley stood stiff, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the crowd. People said all the right things. Time did what it always does, it kept going. The miscarriage came 6 months later, like grief circling back for another pass. Noah, my Noah, held my hand through every appointment, every quiet drive home where the radio stayed off. He was a doctor, but more than that, he knew when not to fix, when to just sit. After the procedure, I moved back into my father's house for a while. It felt safer there, grounded. Like if I listened closely enough, I might hear him clearing his throat before saying something wise. That's when the letters started. At first, they were formal, legal. Words like estate restructuring and fiduciary responsibility. Wesley wanted me to sign over my shares, to simplify matters. Vivian said it was what David would have wanted. They smiled when they said it. Smiles with no warmth. I told myself I was too tired to fight, too broken. That grief had already taken enough. But then there were other things. Checks that didn't line up. Accounts I didn't recognize. A charity my father supported quietly for years suddenly cut off without explanation. When I asked Wesley about it, he waved a hand like shooing a fly. Accounting stuff, he said. You wouldn't understand. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles and felt something familiar stir. Not fear, not anger, attention. My father's voice echoed in my mind, gentle but firm. Look closer, Cassie. The truth doesn't shout. The next morning, I called Maggie. Maggie Adler had been my father's friend for over 30 years. A retired forensic accountant with a laugh like gravel and a habit of noticing things other people missed, like which fork at the table was used least, or which silence lasted too long. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "Sweetheart," she said finally, "don't sign a thing." I looked around the kitchen, the chipped mug in my hand, the sunlight slanting across the counter, and felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Resolve. Outside, a car door slammed. I watched through the window as Wesley stepped out of his sedan, already dialing his phone, already moving like the house belonged to him. I didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath all of us was already cracking. And this time, I wasn't going to look away. Maggie came over that afternoon with a yellow legal pad tucked under her arm and a seriousness in her eyes I hadn't seen since my father's funeral. She didn't hug me right away. She never did when things were bad. Maggie believed hugs were for comfort, not distraction. First came truth. "Show me everything," she said, settling at the dining table like it was a war room. "Letters, statements, emails, even the things you thought were too small to matter." So I did. I brought out folders I hadn't realized I'd been keeping: bank printouts, photocopies of checks, handwritten notes from meetings Wesley insisted I didn't need to attend. Maggie's fingers moved fast, flipping pages, her eyes sharper than they looked behind those thick lenses. The house was quiet, except for the occasional scratch of her pen and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, wind moved through the trees the way it always had, indifferent to human mess. "This," she said finally, tapping a page with the tip of her pen, "isn't sloppy. It's deliberate." My stomach tightened. "Deliberate how?" "He's siphoning funds in small increments," she said, "moving money through shell vendors that don't exist. It's classic embezzlement, quiet enough to avoid alarms, steady enough to add up." I swallowed. "How bad?" Maggie leaned back, exhaled through her nose. "Bad enough that if it comes to light, Wesley's looking at prison time. And that's just the financial side." The word prison hung between us, heavy and unreal. Wesley arrogant, controlling, but still flesh and blood behind bars. It felt impossible. And yet, the numbers didn't lie. "What about Vivian?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Maggie didn't answer right away. She gathered the papers into a neat stack, aligning the corners like she always did when she was thinking hard. "Your stepmother," she said carefully, "is the one who worries me more." A chill slid down my spine. "Why?" "Because money crimes leave trails," Maggie said. "People crimes leave patterns." She told me then about David's death certificate, about how Maggie had always thought the heart attack diagnosis came too fast, too clean, about Vivian's past that no one talked about much. 3 previous marriages, 3 men who died unexpectedly. Livre state, livre docteur, same ending. "Poison can mimic a lot of things," Maggie said quietly, "especially if no one's looking for it." I felt like the room had tilted. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself in the cool wood. "You're saying she killed my father?" "I'm saying," Maggie replied, "that your father may not have been the first." That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound felt louder, the house settling, the clock ticking, the distant rush of a car passing by. I lay awake replaying memories with new eyes. Vivian bringing David his evening tea. Vivian insisting on handling his medications. Vivian standing by his hospital bed, dabbing her eyes while refusing an autopsy because David wouldn't have wanted that. By morning, my grief had changed shape. It wasn't softer, but it was sharper. I called Gregory Shaw after breakfast. Gregory had been my father's lawyer for years, a man with a gentle voice and a spine made of steel. He listened as I explained, occasionally murmuring, "I see," or "Go on." When I finished, he didn't hesitate. "Cassie," he said, "if what you're telling me is accurate, your father anticipated this." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "He asked me years ago to prepare contingencies," Gregory said. "Hidden safeguards, evidence caches, instructions to be opened only under certain circumstances." My breath caught. "And those circumstances are precisely this," he said. "Pressure, coercion, attempts to strip you of your inheritance." For the first time since my father died, I smiled. Just a little. Gregory arranged to meet me and Maggie that afternoon at his office. He handed me a slim key taped to a note written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means they underestimated you." Tears blurred my vision, but I laughed through them. That was my father, always betting on my strength. The key opened a safety deposit box at a small, out-of-the-way bank. Inside were flash drives, printed emails, ledger copies, and one sealed envelope labeled Cassie only. I sat in the little private room, Maggie and Gregory waiting respectfully outside, and opened it with trembling hands. My father's words spilled out onto the page, his suspicions, his quiet investigations, his fears. He wrote about Vivian's temper when she thought no one was watching, about Wesley's entitlement, about transactions that didn't sit right. If something happens to me, he wrote, it won't be an accident. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried not from weakness, but from recognition. He had known. He had prepared. And now, it was my turn. Gregory brought in Detective Reyes 2 days later. Reyes was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a voice that carried both patience and resolve. He didn't interrupt as we laid everything out, the financial records, the letter, the pattern of deaths. When we finished, he nodded once. We'll need more, he said. But this is a start. What kind of more? I asked. Proof, Reyes said. Recorded admissions. A mistake on their part. A trap. I didn't like the idea of baiting anyone, but I knew Vivian and Wesley well enough to understand one thing. They couldn't stand losing control. We decided to give them a reason to talk. Gregory sent word that I was considering signing over my shares, but only after one final meeting at the company office. Vivian responded within minutes, her message dripping with false warmth. Of course, darling. We'll clear everything up. The day of the meeting, I wore my father's old watch. It was too big for my wrist, but I liked the weight of it. A reminder. Detective Reyes wired the office discreetly. Cameras hidden in smoke detectors. Audio running through a secure feed. Maggie squeezed my hand before I went in. Remember, she said, they think they've already won. The conference room smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee. Wesley paced. Vivian sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes sharp. Let's get this over with, Wesley said. You're exhausted, Cassie. We all are. I looked at them, really looked, and felt something unexpected. Pity. Before I sign anything, I said calmly, I just want to understand what my father left behind. All of it. Vivian smiled. There's nothing you need to worry your pretty head about. Wesley snorted. Dad was losing it near the end. You know that. It tilted my head. Bossy? That's when Wesley made his mistake. He didn't even know how much money was missing. He snapped. You think he'd notice poison? The room went silent. Vivian turned slowly toward her son, and somewhere behind the walls, the recording light blinked red. For a moment, no one spoke. Silence has a way of stretching itself when it knows it's about to be broken. Vivian recovered first. She always did. Her hand landed on Wesley's forearm, light but firm. The way you stop a child from stepping into traffic without drawing attention. Wesley, she said gently, you're tired. You didn't mean that, but the damage was already done. Words, once spoken, don't crawl back into the mouth easily. They linger. They echo. I meant every word, Wesley snapped, yanking his arm free. His eyes flicked to me, then away. She's been playing dumb this whole time. Acting like she didn't know Dad was sick. Acting like she didn't know money goes missing in businesses all the time. I folded my hands on the table to keep them from shaking. So money was missing. Wesley laughed, sharp and humorless. God, you really are naive. Vivian's smile tightened. Cassie, sweetheart, let's not turn this into something ugly. Families handle things quietly. Quietly, I repeated. Like refusing an autopsy? Her eyes flickered just for a second. But I saw it. Fear. Thin as a crack in glass. David's heart was weak, she said. Everyone knew that. Did his other doctors know? I asked. The ones you never told? Wesley slammed his hand on the table. Enough! The sound ricocheted off the walls. My pulse jumped, but I stayed seated. Stayed calm. Detective Reyes had warned me people reveal the most when they feel cornered. You don't understand how hard this was, Wesley said, pacing again. I held this company together while you were off, grieving, while you were too busy falling apart. Vivian stood then, smoothing her skirt. We did what we had to do, she said quietly. For stability, for the company. David would have understood. Would he have understood the poison? I asked softly. Her face drained of color. You're being hysterical, she whispered. After everything you've been through, it's no wonder your mind is creative. I leaned back in my chair. You used digitalis, didn't you? Low dose. Enough to mimic heart failure. Wesley froze mid-step. How would you know that? I met his gaze. Because you bragged about it. Just now. The room felt suddenly very small. Vivian's composure cracked. You think you're clever? She hissed. You think because you lost a baby you get to destroy this family? Don't, I said, my voice low and steady. Don't you dare use my loss as a shield. Wesley's face twisted. She was weak. he said, pointing at me. Dad saw that. That's why he trusted me. I stood, slowly. He trusted you with oversight, I said. Not ownership, and certainly not murder. That's when Vivian laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was soft and tired, like she'd been carrying the joke for years. You children, she said, always thinking the truth will save you. She turned to Wesley, her voice suddenly sharp. I told you to keep your mouth shut. He stared at her. You said she'd never find out. She wasn't supposed to, Vivian snapped. But you're impulsive, just like your father. The air shifted. The recording equipment hummed quietly, faithfully capturing every word. Vivian straightened, her mask finally slipping. David was going to cut you out, she said to me. Did you know that? He was going to hand you the company outright. Leave Wesley with nothing. Wesley's eyes widened. That's not true. Oh, it is, she said coldly. I saw the draft. I did what I had to do. My chest ached not just with grief, but with understanding. And the others? I asked. Your other husbands? She waved a hand dismissively. Men are fragile. They break so easily when you give them a little help. Wesley backed away from her. You told me they were accidents. They were, she said. Accidents of love. I heard footsteps in the hallway before I saw them. Detective Reyes entered with 2 uniformed officers, their presence heavy and final. Vivian's eyes darted to the ceiling, to the walls, to the corners of the room. What is this? She demanded. Vivian Vance, Reyes said calmly. You're under arrest for the murder of David Vance and 3 other men. Pending further investigation. Wesley tried to bolt. He made it 2 steps before an officer grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. You set me up, he yelled, his voice breaking. You're my mother. Vivian didn't look at him. She just stared at me. You always were too much like him, she said softly. Always watching. As they led her away, something inside me loosened. Not joy, not relief, release. The trial took months. Financial experts testified. Forensic toxicologists confirmed what Maggie had suspected. Patterns emerged quiet, undeniable. Vivian was convicted on all counts. Life without parole. Wesley pleaded guilty to embezzlement in exchange for cooperation. Life with no chance of early release. I sat in the courtroom, Noah's hand warm around mine, and felt the weight of generations lift from my shoulders. Afterward, I walked into my father's company as its new CEO. The employees stood not out of obligation, but respect. I spoke briefly. We're going to do things the right way, I said. The way my father believed in. They nodded. They believed me. Months later, I stood in our backyard, Noah's and mine, watching the sun dip low. The air smelled like cut grass and possibility. Justice hadn't brought my father back. It hadn't erased my loss. But it had given me something just as precious. Peace. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, and Noah has already fallen asleep beside me, I walk into my father's old study. I don't turn on the light right away. I let the dark settle. I let the room breathe. I run my fingers along the spines of his books. The desk where he once sat, pretending not to worry about me while worrying anyway. I think about how close I came to signing my life away, just because I was tired. Just because grief had made me doubt my own strength. What I learned, what my father tried to teach me without ever saying it outright, is that evil doesn't always arrive shouting. Sometimes it comes smiling. Sometimes it pours your tea. Sometimes it calls itself family. Justice didn't arrive all at once for me. It came slowly, in documents and late-night conversations. In courage borrowed from people who loved me when I felt empty. In choosing to stand even when my knees shook. Taking over the company wasn't about power. It was about stewardship. About protecting what was built with honesty and refusing to let lies inherit the future. Starting a new family wasn't about replacing what I lost. It was about honoring it. Grief will always leave a mark. So will betrayal. But neither gets to decide who we become. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of something that feels unfair, overwhelming, or quietly dangerous, please hear me when I say this. Pay attention to your instincts. Ask the hard questions, and don't let anyone rush you into silence. Truth has a way of waiting patiently for the brave. So I'll ask you, the way Auntie May always does, if the people closest to you asked you to give up what was rightfully yours, would you have found the strength to say no? If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs it. And if you're walking your own long road toward justice, know this, you're not walking it alone.